Here is the big shocker. Apparently, the 15-year-old whom everyone was outraged was killed in that horrific murder just yesterday or day before yesterday, Joshua Andrew. It's alleged that he was a gangster, that
This
he
is
was the target of the shoot-up.
an explosive perspective from Rhonda Dowlatt. That's what
Yes.
she's saying, that he was a gang member and he was involved in this killing of this Pereira guy earlier on, who police were alleging was triggered this revenge attack.
Yes.
But it's a different perspective from Rhonda, but she was speaking with the police officers, and I suppose they would have the information that nobody else has.
Yes.
Let's see, and their bodies. The investigation into Monday's incident in which 15-year-old schoolboy Joshua Andrews and PH driver Devon Hernandez were killed and their bodies burnt while trying to escape has made a twist suggesting that Andrews may have been the target, actually, and not Hernandez.
Wow.
But we wait to see if, in fact, this will bear any kind of fruit at all. Because the family is saying that at night time and so on, and especially Sunday when the Pereira guy was killed, he was home in Trumacag there by about 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening. And that killing occurred later than that. But it makes for very good reading.
Yes, it does, but it certainly is quite the twist. I feel like I'm watching, one of those hot mysteries on television, those police procedurals or something like that. It is incredible. It's incredible. Wow. Wow.
But the minister was there yesterday at the school, and he has deployed about 4 or 5 counselors to the school to counsel the students who were classmates and schoolmates of the young state himself.
In any event, okay, let's say that it is an instance where this youngster may have been caught up, in doing the wrong thing. I think that, notwithstanding, a child was murdered in a vicious way, and we really need to stop and take stock of ourselves. So all those of you, we're assuming that this information is correct and this youngster was engaged in behaving badly, and assuming that is the case, other youngsters who would have thought, hey, maybe I can emulate this guy and be like him, you guys need to stop and check yourselves, because he didn't, and he got himself wrecked in a most horrible way.
Even though the autopsy did say that he died from gunshot wounds and not from being burnt to death, being immolated in a way. But we wait to see if, in fact, this Rhonda Dowlatt story has any veracity to it at all. And what is also interesting about this whole situation is that the people in Laventille up there, they came out, they looked, they gaped and so on, but nobody was demonstrating and so on. You remember, if that had happened with a police officer, what would have happened is that they would have come out and they would have burned tires and demonstrated on the streets and decried gloom and doom and violence against the officials and so on. But I suppose they're so terrified because they probably know who the 2 guys were who shot these guys, that they decided not to demonstrate or burn any tires. Come on. If you're against unlawful killings and that's kind of horrific murders, whether it's the police or whether it's people in the area, say something. You can do it anonymously, as the case might be.
We've got on the line with us now member of the Police Service Commission, Attorney at Law Martin George. Good morning to you, Martin George.
Hi, good morning to you, Jessamy. Good morning, Edison.
Morning.
Good morning to your panel. Good morning, Trinidad and Tobago.
Martin George, we're looking at the headlines this morning, and this shocking possible revelation, and I'm qualifying the statement, that the youngster who would have been killed brutally in that shoot-up this week in Laventille, Trumacag, Laventille, may very well have been involved in gang activity. And I'm just thinking to myself, wow, what is happening with our youngsters, and how are the police supposed to cope with this kind of thing? The body count keeps mounting and mounting and mounting. We're not even 10 days into the new year properly yet, and already the murder toll is about twice, rapidly approaching 3 times the number of days that we're into the new year.
Well, Jessamy, the unfortunate reality is that it ought not to be shocking to us if it is that young persons are revealed to be involved in criminal and gang activity. I mean, I make absolutely no comment about this specific situation and this specific young man because we don't have all the facts. But I'm saying just as a general thing, the reality is that many of our young persons are already very much involved in illegal activities, and that's a reality that we have failed or refused to confront or accept over the years, and we are seeing the chickens coming home to roost. You recall, I think it was last year, the two youngsters,
they were at the top of
they were
Picton Street.
yanked out of the taxi.
That's right.
Yes.
Yes. And I mean, what I found so interesting about that is that their bodies, they found guns on them, and the thing is, the killers didn't even take the guns. So the point is, it just shows the proliferation of arms and ammunition out there on the streets. And, we are in such a terrible crisis. And, I mean, I have never been alarmist or, prone to exaggerations in this regard. But the thing is, it shows that we really are in a crisis situation in Trinidad and Tobago, because not only is there a lack of recognition of the enormity of the problem, but I saw on the headlines, we have again the blame game continuing, because I see now the Prime Minister is now
blaming the UNC.
The opposition, and then of course, the opposition will point back fingers, and Trinidad and Tobago is in a crisis of paralysis. And our leaders have failed us repeatedly, and they continue to do so.
I just wish that they would just
see that the solution to this is that you start pointing fingers at each other across the aisles in the parliament and saying, well, it's your fault. No, it's your fault. I mean, come on, seriously, in 2018, this is where we are at as a nation?
I wish they would just be quiet and the same way that they could come together to agree on a new president, I wish they would come together and agree on a way forward to combat crime. I really wish that would happen.
Yeah, but you see, that requires a certain level of maturity that our politicians have thus far failed to exhibit over the years. And, I mean, this is equally applicable to both sides,
Yes.
I mean, it's not singling out one over the other. They have both failed us repeatedly, because we have seen, even, say, for instance, with this anti-gang legislation, we have seen that when it suits one side and they're in opposition,
yes, indeed,
they don't agree to the, the legislation because they feel it will make the government look good. But then when the shoe's on the other foot and they want to pass the legislation, they then blame the opposition and say, well, you're not supporting us. Come on. We the people, I think the onus really falls on us at this stage, because we are the ones who have to call our politicians to book. We really have to let them know that, look, we are not willing to tolerate this any longer, because they have played us. They really played us like idiots over the years, and because of people's political allegiances, people have felt this loyalty. Well, you have to support what your political party is doing, or your political leader is doing, and really and truly what they've been doing is nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. They're dragging the nation down, to hell in a handbasket.
Looking at the reactiveness of the authorities last night, and after those killings, the police, the defense force, and another arm of the police, they swept through Trumacac, Laventy, and so on, looking for guns and that sort of thing. No guns were found, but they arrested a couple of people. Why can't they have these
the dragnets,
the whole at all times, not be react when something happens?
So you make a big show of it. You recall. Some years ago, there was the Anaconda exercise.
Yeah, they had no names for these
made popular
things.
Under former Minister Howard Chinley.
Yes.
Where they would have this big show and dance of, they had roadblocks,
Yes.
So, and the absurdity of it is that those roadblocks were taking place early in the morning at 8 o'clock.
Yes.
Where you're only inconveniencing law-abiding citizens. That's all you're doing. By that time, all the bandits and criminals back home in their mothers' houses, sleeping and, waiting to go out again.
And counting the loot.
It really just shows that we are not taking any proactive steps. I mean, I look at Jamaica recently. I was quite impressed to see that, because of certain failings, the Minister of National Security in Jamaica last week called upon the police commissioner to account for certain things, and because there was not a sufficient ability to account for it because of they failed to put measures in place because of the street party that occurred on New Year's Day, and so many persons were inconvenienced, flights were delayed, etc. They called on the commissioner to say, hey, well, listen, when you granted permission, what measures did you put in place to ensure that there would be the free flow of traffic? The commissioner was not able to give satisfactory answers. The next thing you hear is that the commissioner is no longer there. So, you see, the point is we have to start taking these types of measures to ensure that persons recognize that there is some level of seriousness and accountability. But then when at the top, the politicians themselves are the ones playing the blame game, then there can really be little or no accountability coming down through the ranks.
Now, Martin George, you referenced earlier the amount of illegal weapons coming into the country, and I mean, the police have been quite diligent within recent months in terms of ferreting out as many of those illegal weapons as they possibly can.
I'll just stick up in here to tell you that diligence is relative, because, in other words, if it is that the police are telling us, well, okay, we have increased the number of seizures of weapons,
yes,
and that, okay, last year we may have gotten 400, this year we are getting 500 illegal weapons off the streets. That is only significant if we are able to know or get some idea as to how many illegal weapons are there actually. So in other words, if you get 500 out of, say, 7,000, then that is not really making a dent in the situation, and we see that. So, I mean, while, yes, we, of course, are willing to applaud and give credit for your increased detection and recovery and seizure of firearms, it makes no sense unless we are able to really get to the root of how many more illegal weapons are out there and how much more you need to do to get the others out. So if you have an increase in the number of illegal weapons available generally by, threefold or fourfold, then to say that you're increasing your detection by a few dozens, it really doesn't affect the situation at all.
And all this is happening while some would argue the borders remain porous, like an old used-up sponge.
Yes, and that's a major part of the problem. I saw that the Minister of National Security indicated, I think yesterday or the day before, that, based on the murders that occurred with this young boy in Shumakak, that, a line has been crossed, but,
that had been crossed a long time ago.
With some degree of concern, because, it's sort of, I think the nation as a whole has already realized a long time ago that a line had been crossed.
Absolutely.
So the fact that the minister now seems to be waking up to this reality, it reminds you in a way of, maybe in a classroom where you have, all the other children have completed reading the book, and, a slow child in the back is now saying, Miss, I have just finished the first page, So, I mean, what does the teacher do? You don't want to discourage the slow child, so you say, okay, yes, Johnny, that's good. But the point is you recognize that Johnny is totally out of it because everybody else has completed reading the book. And, so to now say that, you recognize that a line has been crossed, does appear to be, a sort of Rip Van Winkle effect, whereby,
Martin George, you naughty man.
The rest of the nation is aware of what's going on.
Martin George, how would you analyze the reaction of the people in those areas? Is it fair that they know who these killers are and so on? Because when you have things like that and there's some sort of so-called police killing, they burn tires, they are, they're very, very vicious and very reactive. They were going to do this and do that. But yesterday they were just spectators. They looked and so on, and everybody said, a good boy, whatever it is, and so on.
Why?
How would you analyze that?
That's a good question. Why isn't it that we didn't see, that citizen outrage at the horrific killing of a youngster in that manner, and this taxi driver who was plying his trade, who everyone is saying is the bad guy, but it turns out it's probably not the case at all. If what his wife says, is on the button.
Well, the thing is, I myself am wondering in terms of the quote-unquote community leaders in these areas, is it that they conveniently choose which scenarios they are going to protest against? Is it that they are,
Excellent
unable
question.
or unwilling to mobilize in relation to something like this? Because I would think that something like this, which, has affected your community, it ought to be something that you either, you make your voice heard, you come out, you speak out against it, because...
And it's always very spontaneous.
This is the thing, so it does beg the question. I would think it does beg the question in that regard. I saw the MP for the area. I think he was on the television yesterday.
Yes, he seemed very shattered by what happened.
I think to his credit, I know he has been trying to do some work in the area, but the point is, one person alone can't do that, especially when the designated agencies, starting from the Ministry of National Security, appear not to be able to get a handle on the situation.
That's the other thing. Why is it? Is it that they don't have enough staff? Is it that the very well-trained staff that they have, there are too few of them, and they need to be tuning out more highly trained and specialized staff? Is it that there needs to be a complete reorganization of the staff? What is it that is holding back the Ministry of National Security from fulfilling its potential and honoring its mandate to the citizenry?
Well, Jasmine, what I have said, and it's something that I have said repeatedly, we need to depoliticize the Ministry of National Security. I've also mentioned the Attorney General's office. We really need to look at making some fundamental changes in the structure of these. This is two major ones that I think that we really ought to look at. Because, in other words, what you have is a scenario where with each successive government that comes in, they have their own Minister of National Security who may have his own ideas, thoughts, views, visions, whatever, right, who may or may not be proactive enough or whatever. So therefore, what I think we really need to establish is basically like a National Security Commission, akin to basically like one of the established commissions, like either the Police Service Commission or the Teaching Service Commission, whereby they are, at least for all intents and purposes, they appear to be above the political fray. So regardless of who is in power, you have at least some consistent policies and plans and programs in place for the good of the nation. Because once you have the issue of crime and criminality and the national security being a political football, unfortunately, our politicians have shown that they are not mature enough to deal with it in a reasonable manner that reaches across the aisle, that says, well, look, regardless of, our political differences, we are able to be adults and mature enough to come together to find solutions for the good of the nation. They have shown that they are not capable of that as yet. So therefore, if they are not capable of that level of maturity, then it makes no sense trying to insist that they perform that role. So therefore, we have to look at a different structure, a different construct, so that you have, independently appointed persons who would sit on this commission and basically chart and set plans. And I'm talking about long-term plans which can be consistently followed through regardless of which administration is in power. Something like that, I think, is a first step and a necessary first step, because you see each government coming into power making all the great promises and this, that, the other. And then, the reality is that when they do come into power, they may have good legislative ideas or good plans or programs, or they may be copying what the previous government was trying to implement.
Yes.
And they themselves may have frustrated those plans. And then now they're in power, they're calling on the opposition. And, it's all a charade. And we know that this is what is going to happen. We know the effect. Because when you were in opposition, you did the same thing. Let's call a spade a spade. Let's be realistic. You recall with the anti-gang legislation, the government that's in power now, when they were in opposition, they gave the same difficulty and trouble and did not give the support. So therefore, they're basically shedding crocodile tears now and saying, well, the opposition is not supporting us. Hello, you did the same thing some time back. And this is the kind of behavior that has been repeated.
You
So
notice
unless we break that cycle, we are not going to move forward at all.
what's terrible about that entire thing that you've just described is that after all these years and after everything that has happened, after all the blood that has been shed, all the money that's gone down the toilet, they still don't understand that it's not about them or the individual parties. It is about the country, and that there are some things that you just simply do not politicize. There are some things in which you have a relay race, and one group passes the baton on to the other.
But you know, Jesse, you know, the unfortunate reality is that for them, it's only about themselves and their parties. That's the thing. We would hope that they would be more mature than that and see the bigger picture, but they could not be bothered. It's simply about survival of yourself, your party, and, you know, to ensure that you get what you want for yourself, and to hell with what the nation needs.
You know, at times, Mr. George, the police posts did fulfill a function, because I know there were police posts in Picton and Laventry there, on Prince Streets, on Duncan Streets, Mango Rose, and so on.
Correct.
You know,
But
they were visible,
they
but
appear,
for some reason, to dismantle these things.
temporary bandages that are put on at times of crisis, and then afterwards you see them pulled and they disappear. I don't know what's the reason for moving them. If it is that they are fulfilling a function, if they are fulfilling a role, then why would you remove them?
Because I remember at one time when there was a killing of either a soldier or a police officer down in Covine and Diego Martin. It was a Defense Force soldier. They put up a post there for almost half a year.
They locked it down.
Everything became peaceful, and then of course they dismantled it.
That's right. And you see, again, still we are still functioning in a reactionary mode, whereby, okay, something like this happens, that you make a big show. You get 400 officers and you go and you raid the area. You know, okay, all right, yes, you do that. That's one thing. But what have you been doing proactively all the time? Why do you wait until something like this and then, you know, you create this big song and dance, when this is your job that you should be doing on a regular basis, without waiting for any outcry or any public, you know, calling upon you to do it.
I'm just looking at a couple text messages that have come in on this. One person says, "Good morning. I think aloud at times. The people who are hiding the persons who are committing the crimes are also responsible for the crimes." And another, "Crime is a hard problem. Where are all the so-called prophets? They should help us solve crimes." So, but I want to go back to the first point made, because there was, on social media, there was a particular statement being copied and pasted and forwarded to the tune that right now there is some mother, cooking food for her son, who is responsible for some of the horrible killings that we've seen this year so far. And there's another mother who is grieving and weeping over the death of her son and daughter, who would have been killed by the son of the first mother. Something to that effect. This is a reality. Why are these mothers, why are these family members who know that their family members are committing these heinous acts, why do they not give them up? Why do they not convince them this is not the way to go? Change your ways, change your life.
Well, the thing is, Jesse, the breakdown in our society has become so endemic and widespread and deep-seated that I think that many persons have actually lost a sense of right or wrong, and they basically see things as a matter of experience. You know, if you recall Damian Marley's song, where he says, because he explains the justification of the thinking, right? Say, for instance, in the ghettos in Jamaica, he says, look, when baby want food and can't do without it, Big 45 going to scout it. So, in other words, they justify the wrongdoing. So it becomes to a point where they don't see it as something wrong, they see it as something necessary. And part of that is our leaders have to shoulder the blame, because when the ordinary man sees reported in the newspapers, hundreds of millions of dollars being ferreted away by politicians and, big scandals at HDC and, all other places, Udicot, etc., and persons are apparently stealing money by the millions and billions. They tell themselves, well, hey, look, if they are doing it, hey, we at our level, we have to do what is necessary for us. So, I wouldn't, rush to make the moral judgment against the persons at the lower level of society who do this while ignoring the fact that our leaders have failed to set a proper example. So I'm not saying that what they do is correct or that they ought to, continue that way. But I'm just saying that it makes it even more challenging for them, as you say, to call out their own and their own sons and daughters and say, well, hey, look, you're doing wrong, when the example set by our leaders and our politicians is so appallingly terrible. And in fact, it continues in so many ways. All you see is basically a change of players, but the game remains the same.
The teacher is very important in this whole scenario, Martin George. I mean, I used to teach at the secondary school and so on, but the thing is, are teachers trained in these kinds of scenarios where there's so much violence and so on to be able to function? Because, I mean, when I was teaching, it wasn't just the academic subjects. We had literary and debating society. We had production of a newspaper and that kind of thing now. But I suppose teachers are so traumatized now, they just want to get in, teach, and get out.
Well, that's part of the problem. And you see, the thing is, you as a teacher can only do so much if what you teach at school is being undermined or, undone in the home environment. Then your effort while you are there with the child, trying to, instill values, trying to, teach them right from wrong and say, well, this is unacceptable behavior. But then when the child goes home, what it lives in the home environment may be the total opposite.
Yes.
So therefore, you could preach till you're blue in the face. It may not really make that impact because the reality of what they live in, what they see on a daily basis is so divorced from what you tell them that, all your preaching and teaching becomes very esoteric and airy-fairy that it really has no relevance to their daily lives.
We're coming up to, news time, Martin George, and we want to say thanks for giving us time this morning. Your final word before you depart from us on the show.
Well, the thing is, I think that we really ought, as a nation, to call out our politicians and our leaders and tell them, stop the blame game. Because I am fairly sure you will see an immediate reaction to the Prime Minister's statement whereby the opposition themselves will now be pointing fingers and saying, no, it's your fault. And this is the folly that continues as these politicians, continue with their shenanigans and the sham of leadership and governance that they've been carrying on with for decades in Trinidad and Tobago. They really need to put a stop to the nonsense and, as you say, get together the same way they've been able to do in terms of the nomination of a candidate for the office of president and say, look, let's rise above the political fray just for once, show some maturity and put the good of the nation first and try to find some legislative solutions. I mean, of course, that's not the end, that's just the beginning, but at least it's a start if we can get those measures in place. And then now, of course, the police and law enforcement will have to, play their roles to ensure that they are effective.
Thanks very much, Martin George.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you, Martin George. All the best for the new year.
Yes, thank you.
And we've been speaking with Martin George, attorney at law and a member of the Police Service Commission on the Breakfast Roundtable.
In your car, on your phone, the sky is everywhere. Sky 99.5 FM.